Okay, YouTube, welcome back to another video. I'm smiling because this is my fourth attempt at trying to film this video, but the internet has decided to cut out every single time. So we're currently on the hotspot, which hopefully will allow me to film this video without any distractions. But enough of me waffling. This video, I'm going to talk you through how to structure your year of training for peak performance and to basically just achieve the goal that you've set out to achieve. So if we look at most people, okay, train hard, not smart. Okay, and what I mean by that is a lot of people will do more sets in the gym. They'll, do longer runs. They'll try and run quicker than they need to. And although that's great, the effort is there. It's not always the most strategic thing to be doing, especially if you're looking to perform at your peak. Okay, and now there's a lot of people out there like your David Goggins, etc., where you watch a video of his and think you're not doing enough, so or you'll be told not to take rest. Rest is for the weak. I wouldn't be taking performance related advice off someone like David Goggins. Physically, mentally, yeah, if you want a little bit more of a robust mentality, fantastic. However, when it comes to truly achieving peak performance, I wouldn't be taking advice off him. Now, most people, the reason why I wouldn't be sort of trying to train too hard of such or training too much is obviously without structure, you're going to lead to plateauing, a lot of fatigue, and therefore limited results, putting you round and round in circles. Okay, you might be putting in more hours in the gym, you might be running more, but if your sessions aren't working towards a bigger picture, then not saying those sessions are worthless, but you'll never reach your true potential. Okay, so when we look at like a 12-month block, for example, this is where periodization will solve problems and think of like a long-term roadmap. Okay, thinking 12 months. And then, like I say, we'll go through the periodization sort of phases that I like to sort of go through when it comes to sort of clients and obviously long-term thinking. So when we look at what is periodization, it is by definition planned variation in training that guides you from general fitness to peak performance at the right time. It's probably not the actual definition, but I like that definition. So it's basically allowing you to at certain times across a year or certain time across training blocks, knowing when to push and knowing when to pull. If you get the reference of the Carl Froch. It ensures obviously your training's evolving week and weeks and months and months, so you're continuously progressing, because it might not be getting quicker every week, but you might just maintain for a week when stress is really high, fatigue's really high. That's a bonus, because normally you probably would have run yourself into the ground and not been able to progress. I know that has definitely been the case for me. When I first started running, I was running only 5k and I had to get quicker every single week. Put a lot of pressure on myself because inevitably I was going at 90% to 100% every single run. And all of a sudden, my progress stopped. I stopped enjoying running. Even when I was running, I wasn't enjoying it because of the pressure. Whereas now I have a periodization, I have an approach with running where not every run has to be like that. In fact, none of my runs are really like that. So that's why we like some form of periodization. And instead of guessing what to do, you're building towards a clear goal, as we've spoken about, and think of it as like the blueprint for your training. Okay. So if we look at the building blocks, and if we look at sort of a few different terminologies, we look at a macro cycle, a mesocycle, and a micro cycle. So your macro cycle is that 12-month period, for example. That's the bigger picture. That could be you want to run Berlin Marathon next year. Okay, it's only because it's recently happened. So that is your 12-month goal. If we look at sort of like a mesocycle, that could be 4 to 6 week blocks. It could be 4 to 8 weeks blocks. And that's where we're focusing with a single goal, like could be building your aerobic base or focusing on weaknesses in the gym, such as unilateral patterns or core and trunk development, as an example. And then when we look at microcycle, that's your week by week, and that's sort of your day-to-day workouts, your nutrition, your recovery, and everything else in between on a smaller scale. So we've got macrocycle, which is your long-term, mesocycle, which is that sort of intermediate 4 to 8 week period, for example, and then your microcycle, which is more of a day-to-day sort of workout. Now, why does this matter? Why do we need a periodization approach? Why can't we just go balls to the wall or, just rock up on the marathon and try and do our best? So the reason why this matters is it's going to prevent us from burning out, and it's going to allow us to balance stress. It's going to allow us to aid recovery and balancing sort of stress as well. Obviously, throughout a 12-month period, unless you're a full-time athlete, there's going to be other elements or other things going on in your life that will also take priority: family, work, career, that sort of thing. It's also going to allow us to promote a steady progress instead of random ups and downs. So you think 12 months, you'd probably much rather a slow, steady incline heading towards sort of peak performance, rather than coming up and back down, coming up and then back down. Because if you do that a few times, it gets harder and harder to get that peak back up, just because obviously if you've dropped off or fatigue or injuries, etc. It's going to allow you to peak at the right time, as I've spoken about before, whether that be race day, competition, or some form of testing. From a hybrid training approach, it's going to allow you to balance strength and endurance without any sort of interference. So, if you're doing way too much running, there's going to be a massive effect on your gym training. If you're doing loads of gym training, battering your legs and then trying to do a run the following day, that's going to have an effect on obviously your running. So that's something to consider. And it also allows you, for me, this is my favorite thing, is it allows me to know what I'm working towards each sort of training block. So long term, the goal is to run a 3-hour marathon. It's not my goal, but that's just come out the top of my head. I now know, right, that's in 12 months time. I'm now a year out. What do I need to do in these next 3 months to get me close to that? Right, perfect. I need to make sure I'm running 3 times a week. I need to make sure I'm sleeping 8 hours a day. I need to make sure I'm prioritizing carbohydrates before my longer runs. I need to make sure my gels are on point, etc. So that's why I also enjoy sort of having a periodization approach with sort of training. 5 phases of periodization. So I guess 5, it's mainly 4, 5 just repeat. So number 1 is going to be your base, building the foundation. Number 2 is, I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail on the next slides. Number 2 is build, adding intensity and specificity. There we go. Because you haven't got a lisp. Number 3 is going to be peak, which is going to be sharpening performance. Number 4 is going to be a taper phase, which is about reducing fatigue whilst keeping some intensity in there. And then number 5 is probably a rest and repeat. Okay, so if we go through it nice and simple, your base is going to be focusing on aerobic development, so building your base, your aerobic zone, movement quality and basic strength. So for example, the base will be, I like to do a little bit of an assessment process first. So if I get with a client, the first thing I like to do is see, right, where are your movement screening patterns and strength levels in the gym over 2 sessions, just over the main movements, your compound lifts. And also from a running perspective, what is your all-out sort of 5-kilometer effort? That way I can sort of see, right, your pace for a all-out 5K is at 5 minutes per kilometer and your heart rate was 180 beats per minute. I can then work off percentages for their zone 2 work, their interval work and tempo work. So that's what I like to do. And then the majority of the rest of this phase would be a case of building the base with the runs, steady mileage, building it up gradually, not too much too soon because we don't want to pick up any injuries, etc. And then in the gym, it's going to be very much a case of technique work, some hypertrophy, some mobility, some new movements, just getting used to sort of fitting everything into your schedule, because if you've come from maybe not following something to now following a program, we want to make that transition nice and smooth. So phase 1 is going to be building your base. Phase 2 is all about the build. Okay, so this is where we've got our base, we're working well, we've got a good routine. We may have taken a little bit of a deload as we then enter our build phase. Okay, so here we're going to raise training intensity, develops event-specific strength and endurance. So in terms of, from a strength perspective, heavier lifts, so our compound movements, we still want to stay strong in the gym. We want to develop power as well, because ultimately that's going to allow us to obviously have that effect and improve our running ability and staying free from injuries, which is going to be very important. Obviously, this whole phase, I'm basing it off someone who's a runner, for example. And then obviously with the running, you will include some tempo runs, some threshold work, and then your longer runs will obviously be getting longer. If your first long run on the base phase was 10K, you're probably now looking at sort of maybe 16 to 18K. Again, it's all going to depend on what the actual event it is you're training for and how long you've got to go, and obviously where your sort of current starting point is. Phase 3 is going to be your peak. So like a peak week, this is where you're really looking to ramp things up. You're really looking to sort of sharpen the tool of such. Focus being maximum specificity for the event. So example for a runner would be sort of race pace intervals. It'd be longer running workouts, maybe with some different bits in terms of pacings in there. And it could even be some form of like an event simulation. So if it's like if you're training for a marathon, you might do a half marathon race and treat it like your marathon, but just get used to race day experience, get used to obviously gels, get used to nutrition, event simulation. If you're doing like maybe a triathlon, more brick sessions, etc., where you go straight into a run off the bike. Obviously, distances are going to be not the same as the event, but not too far off. So this is really where intensity's high, volume's high, nutrition needs to be on point, recovery needs to be on point in order to make sure you're progressing. With the gym, you're probably looking to maintain strength levels a little bit more as opposed to pushing things too much, just because of the pure amount of volume in the sort of the cardio/running element. Make sure you're working on mobility, making sure you're still working on obviously strength, etc., core, trunk work, and overall making sure you're staying injury free. And then that's once we've hit our peak, then we will look to taper down before the event or before sort of that end goal. So whether it be a marathon, ultramarathon, triathlon, Ironman, everyone's taper is going to be very, very different. The longer the event or the more demanding the event, probably the longer the taper. So for an Ironman, I did a 2-week taper. Would recommend something like that. For the ultramarathon I did the other week, that was about a 10-day taper, just because it wasn't too taxing, but I was just more making sure I was coming in with no fatigue. So the main aim of this is to reduce your training volume while still keeping a little bit of intensity. It's not a case of right, two-week taper, I'll just sit around not do anything. You're still going to be doing some sessions. They're just going to be slightly adapted and not as much sort of volume, for example. So the goal is to allow your body to recover, super compensate, and peak on competition day. So example could be do some shorter runs, reduce strength volume as well, but maybe add a few more plyometric work, a little bit more explosive stuff, just to keep the body ticking over and ready for the race itself. So that would then be the race. You've completed your event. Now you might go into a little bit of a rest period, allow the body to recover. Naturally, if you've been working for a big goal, you're going to probably want a little bit of rest after, physically and mentally. Don't get me wrong, you probably want to get back into training just because that's the way most people are inclined. But I would definitely recommend taking sort of a week off training after a big event, big adrenaline dump. Your body's sort of all over the place. CNS is all over the place. Heart rate variability is just all over. So have a bit of time to rest, recover. Obviously, how long you have take off will be down to yourself. You might change your focus in your training. You might have a different goal to set. And then you would look to then inevitably go back to phase one, repeat, and build from there. But the more times you do it, the more data you have collected, obviously the easier the changes you need to make will be. So if you did a triathlon and you notice that swimming was a real area you need to improve on, then that can be a main focus in that build phase, for example, or base phase. Common mistakes with this that I see in terms of a periodization approach. Most people skip the base phase and just jump straight into intensity. So they'll go straight into tempo work. They'll go straight into intervals when in reality they don't need to. They never taper and stay in that grind mode year round, which I've spoken about in terms of with the David Goggins approach of just going more is better when in reality it's not. Ignoring recovery and lifestyle stress. Let's say, for example, you've got a work due over a weekend, then okay, what can we do to make sure that we can still get our sessions in without sort of it being affected? Or if we know that work is super busy at the moment, you've been training for 9 weeks, let's have a week deload to sort of drop off stress, catch up on sleep, and then we can push back on afterwards. And obviously following random workouts instead of a structured plan. Which leads me nicely to my free winter build guide. It's completely free. It's a 4-day training approach with 2 cardio sessions in, very similar to what I'm going to be following myself in terms of sort of periodization. This for me now, I've just entered a 16-week block of strength. So my main aim is to build some strength, maintain sort of my aerobic capacity and work on a few weaknesses. So this is something that you can download completely for free in the description, whereby it will give you, like I say, a full week of training, loads of different information in there with your recovery, with your nutrition, supplementation, etc. So do download that if you wish to have something to follow, or you can book a 15-minute call with myself where we can talk a little bit more about the one-to-one coaching that I offer. We can go into seeing sort of where you're currently at, where you're trying to get to, and see if the coaching program is a fit for both. So again, that's completely free. You can book that in the description down below. But otherwise, hopefully we found this video educational. Hopefully it gave you a little bit of an insight into sort of thinking longer term and sort of reverse engineering. And thankfully my internet has not cut out. So big up the hotspot. And if you liked it, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.